For the last 30 years, the shonen genre has had the distinction of being the face of anime, spearheading its international proliferation in the years the medium gained the most notoriety. And it's easy to see why. Shonen manga is accessible in its straightforward simplicity, but diverse in the individual approaches its creators take. Add to that its synergy with Japanese animation, and you have a recipe for success. But what makes the genre fascinating is how it sticks to its foundation but continues to evolve. Look no further than the last decade, which saw rapid innovations due to changes in the medium's landscape. And from this transforming juncture, I'd like to highlight one of the most subversive yet understated shonen titles. World Trigger is a shonen action manga by Daisuke Ashihara, originally serialized in Weekly Shonen Jump before moving to Jump Square. While recognizable from its 2014 anime adaptation, it failed to stand out internationally due to adaptational issues and poor pacing. Which is a shame because 2021 featured its comeback. Toei unexpectedly pulled through on the latest seasons, shedding much needed spotlight on this sleeper hit. What we're doing here is taking 5 case studies under distinct categories that highlight different facets of the series' appeal. While these moments champion the show, we're limiting ourselves to 1 per category and there won't be an actual ranking, so sorry, you've been clickbait. Long-running publications and serializations tend to feature some formula for their storylines, and in shonen manga, this usually revolves around story arcs, the characters, locations, or battles that the arc focuses on. Since shonen is basically inseparable from fights, narrative formula ends up influenced by the mechanics of combat. How fights are fought can influence plot points, world building, and power systems, especially when those fights are framed as the highlights of a series. Introducing mechanics presents a unique dilemma to mangaka, as they're required to make a strong first impact to survive the competition, so they largely resort to one of 2 options. Get through the initial parts of the story without raising unwanted questions until the obligatory info dump, or drip feed your audience information as and when it's needed while keeping it consistent with past details. Neither of these are necessarily better than the other, and the divisions aren't always clear-cut. In fact, most shonen lean into one approach but are hybrid overall. World Trigger uses a combination as well, and while we get more details about the power system as we go along, our first pick goes to the info dump in the first arc. What's impressive about Jin and Arashiyama Squad's battle against the top teams is how it presents us with key details on the power system, but also demonstrates the broader combat formula. The explanations come with practical and innovative examples of how that information translates, so it sinks in better and puts prior details into context. Mixing that up with character dynamics and well-paced action leaves us with a feast. The key takeaways on fights in the series are: certain weapons and positions lend themselves to specific strengths and limitations, everyone has to strategically manipulate the battle, and that skill is useless when you're outsmarted or careless. It's an engaging fight on its own, but what makes it meaningful is how these principles are generalized over the rest of the series. This intelligent, technical battle set a clear precedent for future events, preventing forced concepts and power creeps down the line. Of course, because no matter how complex they become, shonen anime circle back to having characters beat the shit out of each other. And rightfully so. Action is a universal language, and copious amounts of it are what makes shonen action series accessible. There's something wildly cathartic about blasting through adversity with conflict and willpower, especially to the teenage mind, because these fights give form and closure to things teenagers actively experience. And even as we get older, there's something to be said about all manner of issues being solved with violence, because we know that doesn't work in a society. We've got 2 top contenders, First off, the hangar battle. Taking place later into the series, it benefits from a better budget and more streamlined storytelling. Having established the characters, capabilities, and world building, the fight makes few wasted movements, focusing on team play and momentum. Amidst the fast pace, coordinated tactics, and poignant observations, what stands out here is how even the fight is. It's often hard for battles to draw our attention to every little detail, because we know which parts of a fight really matter. But this is different, as every little action threatens consequence. Competing for this pick, we have Yuma vs Visa during the Invasion arc, a battle of information. As we go along, it's made clear previous intel and differences in experience are driving this fight. Even the resources both sides are willing to commit depend on how much they know about their opponent's objective. Tying into the ongoing narrative, the circumstances of other characters shift the fighters to desperate offensives, and in the end, it's a piece of information Visa couldn't have possibly known that ends the fight. Rank battles tend to be too long and complicated, so when having to pick between these two for Bet's self-contained fight, I lean towards the better showcase of World Trigger's unique combat scenarios. The hangar battle better captures the general emphasis on teamwork, and not for the protagonists alone. Both sides were meticulously in sync, and their awareness of the power system reflected in the risks they were willing to take. Oddly enough, the stakes were fairly low. Given the Trion body shtick, neither party had anything to lose but the objective of their mission, so all combatants were professional and stoic, showing the pragmatism of soldiers instead of the emotional reserve of shonen characters. Combine that with the conclusion to this dynamic 4-on-2, and this becomes the most rewarding fight we've gotten so far. Episode 5 of World Trigger introduced Yuichi Jin, an S-rank border agent with the extrasensory ability to see the future. Yes, that's broken, and Jin quickly established himself as one of the most capable members of the cast, preemptively averting numerous threats. Frankly, his presence generates false security building up to after Crater's invasion, but what makes this arc one of my absolute favorites is how it plays with this expectation.
最善の道と最悪の道が隣り合ってる場合もある。揺れ動く未来はレールを転がる玉みたいなもんだ。ちょっとした風や出っ張りに弾かれて隣のレールに移る。今みんなでその玉をふうふう吹いて自分の望む道に玉を乗せようとしているわけだな。
By toying with the intricacies of Jin's foresight and laying out the possible ends, the invasion held my attention by demonstrating how smaller conflicts added up to the grander conclusion. We knew every action influenced the outcome, but the information was incomplete. Until this moment. This was the point in the narrative where everything converged, and the safety net of Jin's prediction evaporated in the scenario with the highest overall risk. It also drove home the significance of prior developments, emphasizing the cumulative nature of this one moment, and personally, I'm a sucker for this kind of tightly constructed writing. As well designed as this whole sequence is, the resolution still manages to surprise, veering completely off course and focusing on the nature of compromise. You can't always have the perfect outcome. The one the protagonists got certainly wasn't bad, but it came at a price. This wasn't a failure. Our MC chose the optimal outcome over the ideal one, ditching perfection to stick to his priorities. Ultimately, this resolution drives home the scale of the threat more than any amount of exposition could. For all the benefits of foresight, for all the cards in their favor, the protagonists lost a lot and barely won because there are no perfect outcomes. This moment is easily my favorite in the entire series, since it captures World Trigger's core message about achieving goals in realistic steps.
メガネ君も知ってる通り、俺には予知のサイドエフェクトがある。だから 敵の狙いが隊員の捕獲だと分かった時点でチカちゃんを遠くに逃がすこともできた。けどチカちゃんに敵が集まった方が他の場所の被害が減る可能性があったからだ。結果的にその狙いはうまくいったけど、メガネ君は死にかけてレプリカ先生はいなくなった。
Sometimes this means cold pragmatism, sometimes sacrifice. But as the next pick shows, when you're dealt a bad hand, you can't get anywhere until you accept it. The B-Rank Wars saga is perhaps what World Trigger is best remembered by. A tournament arc with elements of esports and team battle royale, the rank wars were a great way to flesh out the power system and large cast of characters. Although the first few matches revealed some cracks, they were being acknowledged, our characters were growing, and the victories were conclusive enough that I was convinced it'd be smooth sailing until the away mission. Maybe a smarter viewer would have seen the inevitable defeat coming. Our protagonists were moving a little too fast for comfort, but the series had me going in the first half, and the main reason was probably my own expectations.
知恵と工夫を使う戦い方は俺は嫌いじゃない。
僕に本格的なシューターの戦い方を教えてください。上手くなってるね、メガネくん。こそ練した。
Osamu Mikumo was established as an underdog protagonist from the get-go, and he always delivered. That said, I thought the series was done driving the point home, and was moving him towards being a smarter fighter. We had already seen his creativity and tactical acumen, so one training arc later, you would expect him to come out swinging, but he didn't. And that was the cold reality of World Trigger's power ceiling.
落ちたことをどうこう言うつもりはない。落とされて学んでいくのがランク戦の存在意義だ。鍛錬による成長も感じられた。だが当然三雲以外の人間も日々鍛錬を積んでいる。本当にチームを勝たせたいなら自分の成長という不確かな要素だけじゃなく、もっと具体性のある手立てを用意する必要があった。隊長としての務めを果たせということだ。
What really came as a shock for me was this reasoning. Given decades of shonen manga stressing the importance of self-improvement, of pushing in the face of adversity, there was something devastatingly real about a driven character putting in the effort to improve being told it was pointless. You can't help but feel a little betrayed watching the drive to evolve be humiliated. Through these events, Osamu was told that whatever he tries, he can't become someone fundamentally different. The same goes for Chika Amatori. While she doesn't struggle for talent like Osamu, this match took both their insecurities and failings and threw them straight back at them, leaving them feeling inadequate. And to me, that's real. As far as I can tell, no one pushes forward without hitting low points. Dealing with failure and regret is necessary for growth. The message here isn't to give up because it's worthless to try, but to be practical with your efforts. In a harshly competitive environment where everyone's working to improve, you can't get ahead by banging your head on a hard wall. You have to take the initiative to learn from your mistakes and change your approach. In the real world, hard-headedness hardly ever works. The first step to improvement lies in accepting your strengths and weaknesses, then working with what you have. Compared to the approaches of other series, it's riddled with compromise, but as World Trigger reminds us time and time again, you need to compromise for results. Just like us, these characters can only grow by matching their methods to their means. It's keeping to this message that makes the following matches so entertaining. They show improvement in the characters while remaining consistent with their prior flaws. Considering they're not eliminating these weaknesses, just working around them, it's a nice touch to keep them around. It puts the victories in context and makes them more rewarding, but none more than this moment.
勝った。ハンド。
The final battle of the Rank Wars saga was framed like a revenge match, leading up to the original Mikumo squad versus the top B-Rank team, the main cause of their biggest setback. Ninomiya himself is the perfect enemy to end this arc with, and not just because of his final boss vibes. the skill of a top-class shooter and no issues using his massive Treon reserve, this cosplay set piece embodies the very things Chika and Osamu lack, bringing their insecurities full circle. Although we had this nice little moment of personal development, it's our MC's moment in the sun that shines brightest.
三雲君はもうトリオンがカツカツでしょう。
トリオンの少なさを逆手に。
Every aspect of this victory screams what World Trigger communicates through its narrative and fights. To be yourself. To own it, because it's not an obstacle if you shift perspective. The main trio captured this message by being differing pictures of inadequacy, a lack of courage, a lack of drive, a lack of talent, and this finale weaves their resolutions together. Acting on priorities, relying on others for purpose, exploiting your weakness instead of avoiding it, this climactic moment stresses the role of accepting your failings to overcome them. The outcome to a broader story arc about accepting yourself and your shortcomings, this final fight puts a nice ribbon on the first saga of World Trigger. The Rank Wars didn't criticize the deficiencies of its characters so much as it celebrated them. What made them different made them unique, and gave them ways to succeed entirely their own. I was strongly tempted to give this spot to the Wire strategy in Season 2 for the same reasons, but this was the match that gave me and so many manga readers much needed closure. So that was my little love letter to this somewhat slept-on series. If you're watching this, odds are you're already familiar with it, but I'll take the chance to spread some love. It often feels like a Ryogo Narita collab penned by Yoshihiro Tagashi, between the reconstructed shonen tropes, the massive ensemble cast, and the creativity of its sci-fi world-building. And in such a creatively diverse medium, I feel originality deserves credit. Frankly, World Trigger was a series that helped me through a rather difficult past year, so I couldn't think of a better subject for my first scripted video. Although I feel a bit guilty about using a misleading title to discuss the anime and manga on a broader level, it's only by looking past the veneer that you can truly appreciate them. Feel free to flash some support if you liked what you've seen, and even otherwise, you have my thanks for watching.